Over 1 million Epstein files were just found, and no one knows what's inside yet. For years, people thought the case had already given up its biggest secrets. Documents were released, headlines exploded, and the public was told this was the full picture. But now, it's clear that what we saw may have been only a fraction of what actually exists. Because if more than 1 million records were still sitting in the shadows, untouched and unseen, it raises a chilling question. What else has been missing this whole time? And more importantly, whose names are buried in the files no one was ever meant to see? No one saw this coming. Just when most people thought the Epstein case had already spilled everything it had, the U.S. Department of Justice quietly dropped a bombshell. More than 1 million additional records tied to Jeffrey Epstein were suddenly discovered. Not leaked, not rumored, officially handed over. What makes this discovery so unsettling isn't just the number, it's the timing. These files weren't uncovered years ago when the case was fresh. They weren't found during the first document releases that already shook public trust. They surfaced now, long after many assumed the most damaging material was already out in the open. According to officials, the files were turned over by federal investigators and prosecutors, meaning they had been sitting somewhere inside the system, and that immediately raised questions. If these records existed, why weren't they included before? Why are they only coming to light after multiple document dumps that were already labeled as historic? That's where the unease really sets in, because a discovery this massive doesn't feel like a simple oversight. 1 million documents isn't a forgotten folder or a misplaced hard drive. It suggests something far bigger, layers of material that never made it into the public conversation until now. Even more unsettling is what might be inside. Officials haven't said much, but the wording alone has fueled intense speculation. Names, communications, possible images, connections that were never previously disclosed. None of that is confirmed, but the silence has only made people lean in closer. And while authorities insist this is part of a standard review process, the public reaction tells a different story. To many, this didn't feel like progress. It felt like a reminder that the Epstein case still has locked doors no one's been allowed to open yet. But discovering the files was just the first shock. What happened next, and why the release is taking so long, only made the situation even more explosive. Almost immediately after the discovery became public, one question drowned out all the others. If the files exist, why hasn't anyone seen them yet? The U.S. Department of Justice says the delay comes down to review, a massive one. According to their statement, lawyers are working around the clock to comb through more than 1 million records, line by line, deciding what can legally be released and what has to be removed. On paper, that sounds reasonable. These files involve real people, real victims, and sensitive details that can't just be dumped online without consequences. Names must be redacted, images reviewed, entire sections blacked out if they risk causing harm. That process alone can take weeks, even longer at this scale. But that explanation hasn't exactly calmed the public. In fact, it's done the opposite, because the same agencies promising transparency are the ones deciding what the public never gets to see. And for a case already surrounded by secrecy, that's a tough sell. The DOJ has also warned that some material in the files may be exaggerated, misleading, or outright false. That statement alone raised eyebrows. If some claims aren't reliable, people want to know which ones and who they involve. And until the documents are released, there's no way to verify anything. Meanwhile, every day without answers fuels speculation. Social media fills in the gaps. Rumors grow louder. The longer the wait, the more people assume something is being hidden, even if that isn't the case. So while officials insist the delay is about legality and protection, many see it as something else entirely, a slow-motion reveal with unknown limits. And that's where the tension really builds, because if reviewing the files is this complicated, it raises a bigger question about what they might actually contain. This is where the conversation really heats up. Because while officials haven't confirmed what's inside the newly discovered records, the possibilities alone are enough to make people uneasy. Based on what's already known from past releases tied to Jeffrey Epstein, these files could include far more than simple paperwork. Reports suggest they may contain private communications, travel records, witness statements, and internal notes that were never made public the first time around. And that's just the baseline. There's also been heavy online buzz about potential names, individuals who may have appeared in emails, calendars, or contact lists, but never previously connected to the case. To be clear, that doesn't mean wrongdoing. A name appearing in a document can mean anything from a casual mention to a business interaction. Still, the idea that entirely new figures could surface has people watching closely. Another point fueling speculation is imagery. Some believe the files could include photographs or video evidence that investigators previously kept sealed. Nothing about that has been confirmed, but even the possibility has intensified public interest, especially given how tightly earlier material was controlled. Then there are flight logs and financial records. Past document drops showed how powerful paper trails can be, even without direct accusations. If similar records exist in this new batch, covering different dates, locations, or associates, it could reshape timelines people thought were already settled. At the same time, the DOJ has cautioned that not everything in these files should be taken at face value. Some material may be incomplete, exaggerated, or based on unverified claims. That warning has only added another layer of tension because it suggests sorting fact from fiction won't be simple. So right now, everything about these files exists in a strange limbo. The content isn't public, the speculation is non-stop, and the silence leaves too much room for imagination to run wild. And that matters because we've already seen how just a handful of documents can send shockwaves through the public, which makes the next question unavoidable. If this is what people are guessing, imagine the reaction to the names that have already surfaced. Before anyone even gets a glimpse of the new files, certain names have already shaped how people view this entire case, and that's exactly why this part matters so much. Over the years, previously released Epstein-related documents have referenced a wide range of high-profile figures. Among them were Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Michael Jackson, Kevin Spacey, Woody Allen, Diana Ross, and Richard Branson. Seeing names like this in official records instantly grabbed attention and headlines. But here's where things often get misunderstood. Being named in a document does not automatically mean involvement in any wrongdoing. In many cases, the context is unclear. A name could appear in a contact list, a travel record, or a second-hand claim. Yet once that name hits the public, nuance disappears fast. That's why these associations carry so much weight. High-profile names shift the conversation. They shift the focus from Epstein himself to the people orbiting him, even when the connection is thin or unproven. And once that shift happens, public opinion fills in the gaps long before facts do. That dynamic has already played out more than once. Some documents included allegations that were later disputed or described by officials as unreliable. Still, the damage was already done. Screenshots spread, headlines stuck, reputations were questioned regardless of what the evidence actually showed. And that's exactly why the upcoming release has people on edge. If a relatively small batch of files sparked this much controversy, imagine what happens when more than 1 million more records enter the picture, especially if new names appear without clear explanation. The truth is, names don't just inform the story, they become the story. And once they do, it's almost impossible to separate speculation from reality. Which is why the next layer of this situation feels even more volatile, because when powerful names meet political timing, the fallout rarely stays contained. It didn't take long for this story to turn political. In fact, the moment certain names surfaced in earlier Epstein-related documents, the fallout was almost guaranteed. One of the most controversial references involved Donald Trump. A previously reported document included an allegation that someone had submitted to federal authorities, claiming misconduct years earlier. Almost immediately, that claim became a headline of its own. But the response was just as fast. The White House pushed back, pointing to a statement from the U.S. Department of Justice itself. According to that statement, some material in the Epstein files contained sensationalized or false claims, particularly those submitted shortly before the 2020 election. That detail mattered, because once politics enter the equation, timing becomes part of the story. Allegations filed near an election cycle are viewed differently, especially in a case already surrounded by secrecy. Supporters and critics immediately split into camps, each convinced the files proved something very different. And Trump wasn't the only political figure pulled into the narrative. The inclusion of Bill Clinton in past document releases had already stirred debate years earlier. Even without direct accusations, the association alone was enough to fuel endless speculation. What makes this moment especially volatile was the lack of clarity. No full context, no complete documents, just fragments released into a